NewsRadio unfolds as a sharp, character-driven exploration of ego, authority, and the fragile illusion of control within the chaotic ecosystem of WNYX. Beginning with what appears to be a routine day, but quickly escalating when Dave Nelson is confronted with a situation that challenges his leadership in a very direct and uncomfortable way. Specifically when an external consultant or corporate representative arrives to evaluate the station's performance and management style, bringing with them a rigid, metrics-driven perspective that clashes immediately with the loose, personality-driven nature of the team. And from the moment this outsider steps into the office, the dynamic shifts as everyone becomes hyper-aware of being observed, judged, and potentially redefined according to standards that do not align with how they normally operate. And Dave, who already struggles with balancing authority and likability, finds himself caught between wanting to defend his team and feeling pressured to prove that he can run a tight, efficient operation, leading him to overcorrect in ways that feel unnatural both to him and to everyone else, implementing sudden rules, stricter oversight, and a more formal tone that disrupts the station's usual rhythm, while Lisa Miller initially supports the idea of demonstrating professionalism, seeing it as an opportunity to showcase the team's capabilities, but quickly realizes that the imposed structure is stripping away the authenticity that makes their work effective, placing her in a conflicted position between aligning with Dave's authority and advocating for a more balanced approach. And Bill McNeil reacts in the most predictably exaggerated way possible, viewing the consultant's presence as both a threat and an opportunity, attempting to present himself as the ultimate professional broadcaster while simultaneously indulging in grandiose behavior designed to impress, resulting in a performance that is so over the top it becomes counterproductive, highlighting the gap between how he sees himself and how others perceive him. And Joe Garelli, unsurprisingly, rejects the entire premise of the evaluation, openly challenging the consultant's methods and questioning the validity of reducing human creativity and interaction to measurable data points, which creates tension not only with the outsider, but also with Dave, who sees Joe's defiance as undermining his efforts to present a unified front, while Matthew finds himself once again trying to adapt to shifting expectations, becoming overly eager to follow every new rule and instruction to the letter, only to misunderstand or misapply them in ways that create additional problems, reinforcing his role as both comic relief and an embodiment of how rigid systems can fail when applied without nuance. And Catherine Duke observes the unfolding situation with her usual sharp insight, quickly recognizing that the real issue is not the consultant's presence, but the way it exposes the insecurities and contradictions within the team. And she uses this awareness to navigate the situation strategically, occasionally aligning herself with whichever perspective offers the most advantage while maintaining enough distance to avoid being pulled too deeply into the chaos. And as the evaluation process continues, the episode builds its tension through a series of increasingly absurd scenarios in which the team attempts to meet arbitrary standards that conflict with their natural workflow, such as restructuring broadcasts to fit predefined formats, altering their communication style to appear more professional, and suppressing the spontaneous interactions that normally drive their creativity, all of which result in a version of WNYX that feels hollow, disjointed, and fundamentally less effective, even if it appears more organized on the surface. And this disconnect becomes apparent not only to the audience, but also to the characters themselves, as they begin to sense that something essential is being lost in the pursuit of approval. And Dave, in particular, reaches a breaking point where he realizes that his attempts to conform to external expectations are not only failing to impress, but that are actively damaging the team's performance and morale, leading to a moment of clarity in which he confronts the consultant and asserts that the value of the station cannot be fully captured through conventional metrics, emphasizing that what makes WNYX work is precisely the unpredictable human element that defies easy categorization. And this confrontation serves as the emotional and thematic climax of the episode, as it forces Dave to embrace a more confident and authentic form of leadership, one that prioritizes understanding his team over trying to reshape them to fit an external model. And Lisa supports this shift by reinforcing the idea that professionalism does not have to come at the expense of individuality, finding a middle ground that allows for both structure and spontaneity while Joe's resistance is validated. Though he expresses it in his usual unconventional manner, Bill returns to a more natural version of himself that, while still exaggerated, feels genuine rather than forced. Matthew gains a small but meaningful sense of stability as expectations become clearer and more consistent. And Catherine, as always, acknowledges the outcome with a mix of wit and pragmatism, recognizing that while the immediate conflict has been resolved, the underlying tensions between order and chaos, control and freedom, will continue to define the station's dynamic. And as the episode moves toward its conclusion, the consultant departs with a final assessment that may or may not fully capture the reality of what they observed, leaving the team to reflect on what they have learned. And the closing moments reinforce the idea that while external evaluation can provide useful perspective, it is ultimately up to the individuals within a system to define their own identity and measure their own success. And in the case of WNYX, that success is not found in strict adherence to rules or metrics, but in the messy, unpredictable interactions that make the station feel alive, resulting in an ending that restores the familiar balance while also highlighting the growth that has occurred as Dave leads with greater confidence, Lisa with greater flexibility, Joe with quiet satisfaction, Bill with renewed self-assurance, Matthew with cautious optimism, and Catherine with her characteristic clarity, all of them returning to their roles with a slightly deeper understanding of what those roles mean. And the episode ultimately stands as a commentary on the limitations of trying to quantify human dynamics, using humor and character-driven storytelling to explore the tension between external expectations and internal authenticity, and leaving the audience with the sense that while structure and evaluation have their place, they can never fully replace the complex, often chaotic reality of people working together in pursuit of something that cannot be neatly defined. And as the aftermath of the consultant's visit continues to ripple through the station, the episode expands its focus from the immediate conflict into a more nuanced examination of how external pressure leaves a psychological residue even after the source of that pressure is gone, because although the consultant has physically exited the building, the mindset they introduced doesn't just disappear on cue. It lingers in subtle behaviors, second guesses, and moments of hesitation that begin to surface throughout the team's interactions. And Dave, despite having made a strong stand in defense of his leadership and his staff, finds himself occasionally slipping back into the rigid mindset he had temporarily adopted, catching himself mid-decision as he debates whether to prioritize efficiency over instinct, structure over flow, revealing that confidence, once shaken, doesn't instantly rebuild, but instead requires repeated reinforcement through action. While Lisa experiences a similar internal tug-of-war, as her natural inclination toward organization and professionalism now feels slightly complicated by the awareness that too much control can stifle what makes the station effective, leading her to experiment with a more adaptive approach, though not without moments of visible discomfort when things start to drift beyond her preferred level of order. And Joe, interestingly, becomes more observant than reactive in this phase, watching how the others adjust and occasionally pointing out contradictions in their behavior. Not in a confrontational way, but in a quietly amused tone that suggests he sees the entire situation as a kind of ongoing experiment in human behavior. And Bill, ever driven by perception, initially tries to maintain a version of himself that he believes aligns with the approved image suggested by the consultant, but gradually relaxes back into his more natural persona as he realizes that the exaggerated professionalism he attempted to project was both exhausting and less effective than simply being himself. though he still sprinkles in occasional dramatic flourishes as a kind of compromise between the two extremes. And Matthew's response is perhaps the most visibly transitional, as he struggles to determine which set of expectations he should be following now that the rules have shifted again, leading to a series of small but telling mistakes that highlight how dependent he is on clear guidance. And it is only when Dave begins to communicate more consistently and authentically that Matthew starts to regain a sense of stability, reinforcing the idea that leadership clarity has a direct impact on team confidence. And Catherine continues to navigate the situation with her characteristic precision, offering observations that cut through the lingering confusion and subtly guiding conversations back toward a more grounded perspective, often reminding the others, in her own understated way, that they are overcomplicating something that ultimately comes down to doing their jobs well and trusting their instincts. And as the episode progresses further, it begins to illustrate how the station gradually reclaims its natural rhythm, not by rejecting everything the consultant represented, but by selectively integrating what was useful and discarding what was not, creating a more balanced approach that feels earned rather than imposed. And this process is reflected in the way scenes unfold, with interactions becoming more fluid again, humor returning to its usual pace, and the sense of forced performance fading into something more genuine, yet still carrying a trace of the awareness that was introduced, as if the experience has added a new layer to how the characters understand themselves and each other, and Dave in particular emerges from this extended arc with a slightly more grounded sense of leadership, one that acknowledges the value of structure without becoming dependent on it, and that recognizes the importance of authenticity not as a vague ideal but as a practical necessity for maintaining both morale and effectiveness. While Lisa finds a more comfortable balance between control and flexibility, Joe remains a consistent advocate for individuality. Bill settles into a version of himself that blends confidence with just enough self-awareness to keep it from becoming entirely delusional. Matthew gains a small but meaningful increase in confidence through clearer communication, and Catherine continues to operate as the quiet stabilizing force that helps keep everything from tipping too far in any one direction. And by the time the episode reaches its closing stretch, there is a clear sense that the team has not fundamentally changed, but has subtly evolved, carrying forward the lessons of the experience in a way that feels organic rather than forced. And the final moments reinforce this by presenting a return to the familiar chaos of WNYX, but with a slightly different tone, one that suggests a deeper understanding beneath the surface, as if the station has absorbed the disruption and incorporated it into its identity, rather than being defined by it. And in this way, the episode extends its thematic exploration beyond the immediate narrative, offering a broader commentary on how people and systems respond to evaluation, pressure, and the challenge of defining themselves in a world that often demands clear, measurable answers to questions that are inherently complex and subjective, ultimately concluding that while external perspectives can provide insight, they can never fully capture the essence of what makes a group dynamic work. And that true effectiveness lies not in rigid adherence to imposed standards, but in the ability to adapt, reflect, and remain authentic in the face of constant change.